Want to say welcome, good morning to day 2 of Innovations in Education, and specifically to Creating Immersive Curriculum. My name is Susan Lisenby, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. I'm one of the lead teachers at Hirsch Academy, and I'm excited to talk to you about this topic. It's actually one of my very favorite things to talk about. So, looks like we've got just a few more seconds to go on the poll. Looks good. All right. Stop that here. Okay. So, all right. So welcome. I'm Susan Lisenby. This is Creating Immersive Curriculum. Like I said, I am a lead teacher at the Hirsch Academy. And my main areas of focus are philosophy, literary studies, and writer's workshop and the hero's journey. And in my opinion, the common thread that connects all of these seemingly unrelated subjects for me is the power of story. Let's talk about it. Stories are the most powerful way to put ideas into the world. Provocative statement? Maybe. But I've come to believe that the power of story has something very important and even powerful to teach us about teaching. Think of your favorite story, the one that drew you in, the one that had you instantly engaged and eager to continue in order to see what would happen. Now think of a story that didn't, the one that you abandoned, the one that you just couldn't motivate yourself to finish. What was it that was missing for you? What made that particular story unsuccessful? Well, it turns out that many stories you hear or read have absolutely no effect on you. They are not vividly imagined in your mind. They don't engage you on an emotional level. They are not memorable or relatable. They don't change or expand your beliefs or your attitudes or your behaviors. You simply don't learn from them. Well, curriculum also tells a story. And like many stories, it's clear that some curricula does not have the desired effect on our students. Maybe the subject matter is hard for them to imagine. Maybe it doesn't engage them on an emotional level. Maybe it's not memorable or relatable. Maybe it doesn't change or expand their beliefs or their attitudes or their actions. Whatever the reason, students simply don't learn from it. Stories only work, you see, if you're immersed in them. We know that the human brain wants to be immersed. We know that humans want to get involved in a story, to carve out a role for themselves, and to make it their own. So what if the very elements that create an immersive story also provide a formula for immersive curriculum? At their most effective, immersive stories occur in that magical overlap between the science of story and the agency of a game. On the science side, stories are considered to be cognitive structures. They provide a framework within which we can think, understand, create meaning, and remember. The game side provides an opportunity for active involvement. This is enormously important. Games instinctively invite you to become part of the story, a player with individual agency and decision power, who can impact the story world and contribute to the shape of the outcome. When a story is so engaging that we can feel and hear and see and experience the details, we become transported. We are no longer passive observers. We are now active participants. We are immersed. I'm inspired by the idea that the content that we teach is best considered a living thing, able to grow and develop. In the same way, I'm inspired by the idea that learning is also a dynamic state, an activity that requires involvement and engagement. So what if we could intentionally design curriculum that easily offers both? What if we can utilize the cognitive scaffolding of a story to support the active involvement of our students in creating meaning? I think we can. Combine the lure of an engaging story with the motivating agency of a game, and you can create an extremely powerful, immersive learning experience. Okay, so before we move on to the how to do this, I just want to orient you all to what you're going to see. I'm going to go over the definition of immersive curriculum and the 4 steps that I think come from that definition. Then I'm going to talk to you about what the examples of those steps might look like. And the way I want to do that is I want to show you what it looked like in our classroom, or in my classroom. The examples I'm going to show you come from a class called Young Philosophers. It's a small group of speaking and non-speaking students who use a variety of methods for communication. And at the time that we taught the class, they were between the ages of 7 and 8 years old. So for each step that I go through, I'm going to talk to you about the questions to consider, and then I'm going to move to an example. There's going to be a worksheet available for you after this talk is posted on the website. You can download that worksheet. It'll have all the questions and all the steps, so you don't have to worry about taking a bunch of notes. And at the end, if we have time and you want to participate, there's going to be an interactive opportunity after the Q&A where we will take a concept and apply these steps to something. So I hope you'll join me for that. All right, here we go. So what is immersive curriculum? It's an intentionally designed, facilitated, and collaborative learning experience occurring within a fictitious or actual storyline designed to support the acquisition, the processing, and the production of knowledge. All right, in my opinion, there are 4 basic steps to doing this that come from that definition. Step 1, anchor the experience. We're going to talk all about each of these steps, by the way, and I just want to orient you to what we're going to do, and then we're going to move forward and pull it apart. Step 2, you situate your students. Step 3, you provide an interesting problem to solve. And step 4, you extend the interaction. All right, so step 1, anchoring the experience. So I want you to think of the story structure as the field where the experience will play out. It needs to have sufficient boundaries to keep the players in the game, but also provide enough flexibility to allow for change. After all, sometimes the best stories color outside the lines, right? So this is also the step for you to consider how your storyline can provide opportunities for your learning objectives. And we'll see more about that as we go on. All right. So the first thing you must do is start with the unexpected. This is crucial. It needs to be intriguing. It needs to be out of the ordinary, even magical. This is how you draw them in. This is how you engage them from the start. There are so many famous examples. I just pulled these 3. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, obviously Star Wars. In the middle there is in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit, one of my favorites. And then on the far end, things are never going to be the same again, from Spider-Man. So I started with this. I'm going to play just a little clip for you because I did play this in full for the kids. Okay.
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailor and the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour.
Okay, I'm going to pause it right there because there's more to tell on this story. But for those of you who don't recognize this, this is Gilligan's Island. It was a sitcom that ran for 3 years between 1965 and 1967. This series followed the comic adventures of 7 castaways as they attempted to survive on an island where they had been shipwrecked. Most of the episodes revolved around conflicts between the characters and their unsuccessful attempts to escape. There were relatively understandable problems, really clear goals, and familiar characters. To me, it seemed like a great place to start to frame the thought experiment based on being stranded on a deserted island. And let me show you what that looked like. Okay, so just like Gilligan's Island, our experience began in this way. So this thought experiment is called Republic Island, and it comes from this book at the bottom that you can see called The If Machine by Peter Worley. I highly recommend it if you have any interest in doing philosophy with your kids. It's an amazing book. And this is the script on the left-hand side. So if you can imagine playing some music like this while you introduce the script. Let me show you. Whoop, uh-oh. Back up. There we go. So imagine that you're traveling across the Pacific Ocean at or about the time of the ancient Greeks. Your transport is a large wooden ship with huge sails. It's been traveling for weeks across a featureless sea. A darkly powerful storm whips up and rages for days. The storm eventually capsizes your ship and you find yourself tossed about. You manage to grab hold of a free-floating piece of wood, such as part of the mast or treasure chest, and you hang on for dear life. Okay. All right, so situate the students. So place them in an unfamiliar environment that they must figure out. This is step 2, by the way. Describe it, map it out, paint a sensory-rich picture for them. You want them to be able to vividly imagine this world. The presence of a mystery or a dilemma or an oddity is essential. Tell them what's strange about this place. Tell them what the rules are that govern your unique story world. It's got to be something different than their usual world. Once you've done all of that, reveal their roles. Make the story about them. Make them essential characters. Give them backstories and motives. These roles need to be meaningful and motivating and designed to ensure that your student faces the right progression of challenge to stretch or build their abilities. All right, show you what it looks like in Republic Island. All right, mapping out their story world. So on the left is a script I'm going to continue to read from, and on the right is a picture of my dry erase board, the large one on a wall in the classroom. You discovered that your island is uninhabited. There are absolutely no signs of human life whatsoever. All around the perimeter or the outside edge is a golden sandy beach. The middle of the island is covered with a lush forest full of animals and different fruits. There's a mountain at the heart or the center of the forest from which run several freshwater streams that feed a lake at the bottom, which is full of fish. There's plenty here for you to live on. So the map, by the way, we drew the very first day and continued to draw for weeks after that. It became something that anchored the kids to their own evolving landscape in the story world, which I thought was really interesting. All right, providing adventure reality and revealing their roles. In the Republic Island Immersion, all the students were cast as castaways on the uninhabited island. They were all equally stranded. Figuring out how to adapt to their new surroundings and make decisions within the constraints of this environment was my original goal. The students were tasked with deciding how to answer 2 very basic questions, which we're going to talk about in just a second. What do you need to survive, and what will you decide to do first? Seems simple, right? What I didn't realize at the time was how complicated those 2 questions could become. Okay, step 3, an interesting problem. So stories happen on the way to solving problems. The storyline has to provide drama and suspense and trouble. Unforeseen obstacles must arise to impede the students' goals. You can do this by creating a mismatch between the characters and their actions, the possible solutions, and the setting. It's important to break the problem down to the series of goals, to give them voice and choice in their solutions, which we're going to talk a lot more about in a minute. This is where your students are going to become actively involved in the story. It's a really, really important piece. Let me show you what it looked like when we got there. So surviving as a castaway, that was their problem. The students were tasked with deciding how to solve the problem of survival. Look at let's see on the left, your first task is to do the best to survive in your newly found home. You're going to need the basics: food, shelter, water, and fire. How will you survive? Will you work together, or will you delegate one task to each person? So on the right, you'll see my questions: how will you survive in yellow, and will you work together? Survival at this point was both the problem and the main question. And in philosophy, or at least in the if philosophy version of philosophy, this is called a task question. It means it's a broad type of question with no right answer that requires scaffolding using what we call nested questions to break down the concept into smaller pieces. So you'll see that when I ask how will you survive, there are other questions that fall beneath that. The nested questions offer a perfect way to differentiate for students. Some might enter the conversation through structured choices, while others might answer on their own, and still others might engage by simply agreeing or disagreeing. The key here is that each student is offered an opportunity to participate at the level that suits their growth. So here, I was expecting them to give me food, shelter, water, and fire, but instead, I got other. And once we got other and dug a little further, I realized, nope, they're already outside my concepts. They're on to SOS and wood. And not just wood, but sticks. And once we got sticks, we asked what they were going to use those sticks to what survival basic would they use the sticks for? Fire, SOS, and shelter. Okay, voice and choice. So this slide shows really what it looks like to take that very simple but open question and scaffold it to create varying levels of entry. Structure your nested questions so that you can build toward more complicated reasoning. And I want to talk to you just for a second about this because it is important in the voice and choice part. Offer some questions that ask only for information that has already been taught, in fact, recently taught. And in this example on my slide, you'll see those in green. Those are the things that I literally taught and they could just pull from memory. Also offer slightly more complicated questions that are tightly bound to the concept but allow for expansion. You'll see those in orange. This is where students are still working within the idea of, for instance, what do you need to catch fish, but they can give some opinion now. And then offer open response questions that ask for their own ideas. So once we did what kind of food is available, what do you need to catch fish, the next most logical question is what kind of tool would you need for this? With a mix of questions like this, you will ensure opportunity for involvement at a just right place. And I also think that you end up structuring choices and questions that slowly build to more complicated reasoning. And this is the way to do super deep and open type work in little tiny bits and pieces. So while the thought experiment was intended as a short, simple lesson on adapting to new conditions, the students quickly identified with their characters and their plight. They were immersed in the story and the responses were expanding the context. The plot structure of the story was no longer simply happening to them as characters. They were happening to it. This was when I realized that we were into something really different. Republic Island was no longer a thought experiment. It was a place where disagreement and cooperation and challenges and resolutions were all changing the landscape of the story. And now I had a decision. How was I going to respond? Okay, public service announcement. Since we're going with vintage TV, I thought I would do this as well. I want to talk to you for just a minute in the next slide about what's super important for you as the teacher to take in before you can move to step 4. So tips for immersive curriculum guides or teachers. It is less about delivering content and more about guiding discovery. It's important that you design the interaction so that there are multiple paths to resolution. There is no one right way. Draw out their thinking and their decisions with deliberate choice questions that narrow and expand as needed. That's what we just got finished discussing in the previous slides. And most importantly, move from dictating to facilitating. All right. So step 4, extend the interaction. Make the storyline specific enough to frame the experience, but flexible enough to allow the students' decisions to have impact. Every bit of new information that they provide and you provide needs to build on what comes before. Give the students voice and choice and permission to make impactful decisions. This is where you're going to need to facilitate these interactions. Allow their decisions to alter the conditions of the story as you move through it. That's the hardest part. Look for cross-curricular opportunities because they're going to show up everywhere. And then be amazed at where this will take you. So, leave room in the storyline for expansion or nation building. This is what happened to Republic Island. Let me show you. The naming decision was a wonderful example of how the student's voice and choice could completely change the trajectory of the story. So I pulled this naming decision lesson out of How to Build Your Own Country, and which is another great resource up in the right-hand corner. It's all about the different ways that countries can be named. And you can take a look here when you have the time, but it goes through, well, countries can be descriptive, they can be colorful, they can be directional. And then we get into what if you wanted to name your country after yourself? Now here's another opportunity to do something interesting, fun, and choice-based, right? I asked them to try their first or last name, pull off the last 2 letters, and add A or IA to the end. We did that. And then we went through the concept of land or stan, like Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, and we did it that way with their other name. And then I asked them whether or not we were ready to name our island together. They weren't. So we did another level. We gave columns A and B that they could choose from. Someone could add something to column A or take something from column A and apply it to column B. We did all of these lessons about naming different ways you could name. And in the end, I asked for an agreement. And if we didn't have an agreement on naming the island, we needed a way to decide. Well, the boys could not agree on a name, so they chose to divide the country into fourths. The regions were then named independently. Dagestan, the United Federation of Turtles, and the Sovereign State of Young Philosophers, which was created by 2 boys who joined together and combined their 2 fourths. "44 pages of transcript, 5 months of lessons. The students survived. They built and named nations. They designed flags. They composed anthems. They formed constitutions. They established laws. They designed bartering systems and currencies. They created holidays, and they finally escaped from the island." This was my most important part, I think, or most exciting part. The students remained in character, by the way, for all of these months, eagerly anticipating and approaching the different challenges on the island week after week. We never had to reteach where they were and what they were up to. And in the end, I asked for some feedback. So immersive curriculum is not just something I used in Young Philosophers. I used it in a couple of other classes as well. And so I asked a range of ages of students to give me their feedback on what this type of learning, what their thoughts were about this type of learning. So one student over in the orange said, "It's an unusual use of right hemisphere. Tell the teachers that you give frame of reference, voice, and reasoning." The one in the middle said, "Really excellent concept. Reach the students by raw creative details. Very Hirsch fabulous." And on the right, a student who was in this class said, "It makes all the difference." All right. So what will you create? I'm going to open it up now for any questions that you might have. You can type into the chat box. I also want to remind you that there's a brainstorming session. We've got probably about maybe 10 or 15 minutes that we can do that with. If you stay on after questions, we'll do that. And for more information, or if you need to just get in touch with me, here's my contact information at the bottom. All right. So Jess or Kelly, if you would send me.
Yes. Thank you first. That was so awesome. I love seeing the Name That Island game. That looked like so much fun.
Oh, thank you.
So first I got one question asking, how often are you teaching this class? Like, is it once a week, twice a week?
It's weekly. It is a 45-minute session that we do every week.
And do you have communication partners for each individual?
In that particular class, we had either a communication partner and or a communication/regulation partner in the room.
Okay.
Yep, we did for that one. I didn't in some of my other classes. It just depended on who was in the classroom.
Awesome. Okay, so Mary Giorgio is saying these are all such great ideas, and Hannah is asking, how might this look different in a larger classroom, for example, in a public school?
I would think in a larger classroom, you could still do exactly the same thing, but your groups might be, instead of, you know, one kiddo having a quarter of each of the island, you might have tribes, you might have groups, collectives. You might be able to have them work in smaller groups and still make decisions on a platform that made it so that they had to interact with each other as groups. I think that was the most important part for this class.
Great. And Dawn Marie says, this was excellent. Thank you. Julie is asking, do you have any virtual options?
You know, we didn't do YP virtual in the last few months, but we did everything else virtually. And I absolutely think it's something that we could do. It really would be a lot of fun to do that. It really would. We did do some virtual experiments with a larger group of kids from a local private school off and on during the year for Hero's Journey. And it was great. Amazing.
Great. Tyler is asking, would this work in an inclusive setting with, say, a class of 25 children?
So the opportunity I was just talking about had my students, which is a much smaller group, and then a virtual group of about that number of neurotypical students. And it did beautifully. I think what you would have to decide is how many in the classroom can you manage with some movement and with some interaction. And when you've got that many in the class too, it's going to be a lot more important for you to find those ways to do the structured choices so that you can keep the pace of the material moving and don't get stuck.
I was also curious, did you do any of this during, with the COVID? Were you able to integrate this into your virtual classes during that period?
Yes, we did not continue with Young Philosophers during virtual, but we did continue with Hero's Journey and did it very much in the same way.
And were the parents able to support, or?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, because of these. So what you saw over and over, these quad, and I'm hoping you can still see me, these quad board choices, we put them into the slides so that kids could either read them aloud, reach out and touch them, select them, spell them. It made it much easier for parents to follow along.
Cool. So Jordan says, OMG, I love this so much, Susan.
Thank you, Jordan. It was fun to do. Really fun to do. Yeah.
Any final questions?
If not, we have about 10 minutes, which means we're going to have to unmute folks if they want to hang around and do the brainstorming.
Okay, great. I'm going to add in here the feedback form as well. So if you guys can all remember to check that out later on, and then I will make it so everyone can unmute. She says, this is amazing, Susan. I always wanted to write like this.
Ashish, join me.
Thank you. This was excellent. All right, so you're going to do an interactive piece for about 10 minutes, correct?
Yes, if people are up for it. We're going to do journey to the cell if people want to do it. So here's the concept slide, journey to the cell. And then the questions I have ready to go, they're here. And all we need to do is brainstorm in what way, how would you approach journey to the cell? How would you answer the questions that came under each of these steps? Oh, can you still hear me, Jess?
Yes, I can. Hold
Okay.
We can hear you. So is this for either parents or spellers or professionals to answer?
I'm saying anybody who wants to jump in, I would love to do some brainstorming. It's a much more fun way to work your way through these. And these are pieces and parts of the worksheet that you'll have available to you on the website in a few days.
So you should be able to unmute yourself, or you can write in the chat box if you have an idea.
Yes.
Susan, Jordan said, I would make the cell into space or a land.
Space or, oh, you mean a cell in space? That sounds like a cool idea. Okay.
Okay, Lee says, I'm thinking of that old movie where they were in a spaceship inside the body and we're traveling around. It reminds me of, what does that remind me of, that show?
Oh, the Magic School Bus?
School Bus, yeah. Jordan, make the cell into space or land.
Yep, I think that's what he said. I was trying to make sure I got it in the...
Oh, sorry, okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yes. Yeah. So what's another possible storyline? I love make the cell into space or land. I can tell you I did this once with a writing group, and I told them that a strange, Dr. Strange scientist had driven by with his shrink gun and hit a bump, and all of Hirsch Academy had been reduced to nano size, and that they were then taken into someone's nose and had to make their way out by going through a cell, which was fun because Jill, our science teacher, had just finished teaching the parts of the cell. So it was perfect. They were able to apply what she had already taught them in a creative way. But these are all the ways that you start with the unexpected, right? You tell them your cell is in space, or you make yourself a cell into land, or you've been shrunk. Anybody else have a storyline they want to type in or chat in or speak? If not, how about content goals? If I've got any, oh, thank you, Jordan. He says, love having participation. Yes. I would love to know what you think the content goals might be for Journey to the Cell. I'm not a science teacher. I'm more of a creative writing kind of gal. We did it anyway. Identifying parts of the cell, absolutely, right? Yep, that was certainly part of the writing experience for us. They had to, well, they first had to tell me how they know whether they were in an animal or a person, because Jill had taught them the difference between animal cells and plant cells and animal cells. Yep. Yep, organizing the order of the parts, certainly. Great idea. So let's see, multiplying cells, cell division, yes. Biology, the roles of different cells, the functions, absolutely. Correlating the parts to their functions. Yeah, how cells function. All of these, this is great, guys. I'm sorry? Oh, I thought I heard someone. These are all great ways to open up your story too. So once you start thinking, well, what are the content goals? They give you more context for your story. Here's, let's see, from Susan. Let's see, how about there's a cell that needs help, and in order to get it, you have to flow in the river of blood, climb over the organs, etc. There you go. Amazing. Personifying the parts with emotion. Yeah. Yes. So I'm so glad to see you all catching on. There's so many ways that you can do this once you just decide, all right, what's the context, journey to the cell? What's the unexpected part of this? And then what are the content goals, right? And I'm going to move to the next slide. So timeline, where and when does the story happen? Okay, that could be important. I sort of did that. Yep, let's see, a land cell that feels more like a space cell, a misfit. Oh yeah, Alex, good. Exactly, that would be fun. Students need to collaborate. So thinking about how they're going to work together. Are they all in this cell at the same time? Are they in different cells and they have to find each other? Why is this happening, right? So in my example, it's happening because this scientist had a mishap as he drove past Hirsch Academy. What rules are imposed in the unique story world? So how are they breathing when they're in there? Are they able to use what they can find? Any way to give them some sort of adventure and reality at the same time, right? What's it like to be in the story world? The sensory piece of all of it. Anybody have ideas about those? Any of these? Situating the students? Thank you, Lee. And I'm going to move to the next one. You all jump in when you want to. I just want to make sure I go through all of it one more time. Create an engaging problem to solve. So this is interesting. Begin with a concept or a process, and then create a world where that process is altered. So similar, I think someone mentioned it, like what about you're in outer space and the cell can't function the way that it is used to functioning? That would mean that the students need to understand how cells typically function. And once you remove a piece of that, then they've got to work at the problem of either creating that scenario back again in a different way, or how to alter the cell so that it will work in this new world. What do the characters need to do to solve the problem? It's pretty important, right? They need something that they've got to do. They have to have goals. What are the compelling reasons or motives to reach the goal? Oh, here's Julia. Imagine being shrunken in a cell in the nose and being sneezed out. Oh gosh, yes, right, exactly. Like COVID, yes. What obstacles will you force the characters to struggle with? Have I ever used physical props? We actually did. There was I glossed over it. There's a part where they talk about how they were going to bring water. And we talked about what would they use. And one of the kids came up with an idea of making a bowl out of a leaf. And I think we got some construction paper and figured out a way to fold a leaf so that it might be able to hold something like that. But I do think anything you can do that brings in sensory experiences makes this immersive curriculum even better. Okay. Lots of obstacles, by the way. If you're in the cell somewhere and you've got to get out, there's no end to how many obstacles you could run into. And then extend the interactions. So what cross-curricular extensions are possible? I can think of tons. Obviously a lot of science, but also a lot of problem solving, possibly some math, possibly some STEM type ideas. And then, let's see, opening scene. Oh, hi, Laura. Would be me as the cell fighting an invader. Oh, cool. Each type of cell belongs to a different tribe responsible for different functions. The time is 3.8 billion years ago, the evolutionary origin of the human cell. Woo, that's a good one, Laura. Wow, really good one. All right, and then lastly, how can the storyline move you into the next teaching topic? Because there's really no reason that it can't. As you're facilitating and you get near the end, or it seems like you're getting near to the end, it's a great place to drop in something that moves you into whatever the next topic is you need to teach. All right, everybody, I think I might be out of time.
Yeah, that was so great, Susan. Thank you so much.